All photos are black and white historic photos unless otherwise stated. National Park Service logo, Mount Rushmore National Memorial. Experience your America. Memorial with clouds and blue sky. Text reads, Mount Rushmore and Stone and Story, the Sculptor's Studio Talk. Man in front of model of Memorial, more than double his size.
My name is Blaine Cordemeyer. I'm the Assistant Chief of Interpretation here at the Memorial, and I've been here for 16 years.
Exterior studio building with Rushmore in background.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Mount Rushmore National Memorial. Specifically, welcome to the Sculptor Studio. This building was completed in 1939 and houses the tail end of the process of carving. Gutzon Borglum, the sculptor, the guy over here in the picture, actually worked here in this building for periods of time. Now, Mount Rushmore, just like everything else, starts out with an idea. So I want to have a show of hands here amongst you. How many of you came up with the idea to come to the Black Hills yesterday?
In front of model with tools on ground.
Any yesterdays? What? No one? Oh, there's one. Excellent. Yesterday, you came here, decided to come here yesterday. How about a week ago? Who came up with the idea to come a week ago? Oh, we got a few more people. Outstanding. And of course, some of you have decided to come here to the Black Hills for months. You've been planning this trip for months now. Now, the planning is part of the process, but the original idea becomes planning, becomes commitment, and finally follow through and accomplishment. These are the processes that we all go through when we decide to do anything. And Mount Rushmore is exactly like that. See, Mount Rushmore starts with an idea. One guy, his name was Don Robinson. He's the gentleman on the left-hand side of the mantle up there.
Fireplace with 4 busts on mantle.
It was his idea as the state historian of South Dakota, the very first one ever.
Close-up bust Robinson.
That he should get someone to create
Photo Robinson.
A sculpture here in the Black Hills that people would come and see it. Leave their money here and go home. That was literally, tourism was the original idea of Don Robinson, to bring tourists to the Black Hills. But Don Robinson, being our state historian, could not accomplish such a feat. So he, was reading his local newspapers and heard about a guy who was carving a mountain in Georgia, of all places. Perhaps you know the location I'm referring to. Who's ever been to Stone Mountain, Georgia?
Present-day Stone Mountain.
A couple of you. Outstanding. Stone Mountain is an amazing sculpture, and there, of course, there are 3 Confederate generals on that ridgeline.
Photo Borglum.
And Gutzon Borglum was the first sculptor on Stone Mountain. Now, his work does not remain there today, but he is the first sculptor on that particular ridgeline. So Don Robinson learned about Gutzon Borglum from his works down at Stone Mountain. So literally telegraphed Gutzon Borglum there at Stone Mountain.
Telegram Robinson to Borglum.
Gutzon didn't happen to be there at the time, but his telegraph got forwarded on to where Gutzon was, which is up at his home in Connecticut. And it's that point where Gutzon Borglum buys into an idea that he could potentially complete 2 sculptures at the same time. Now that gives you a window on who Gutzon Borglum was. So far in our process, we have the idea person, we've got Don Robinson, we've got Gutzon Borglum. Now, Gutzon Borglum hasn't made a commitment yet, but he soon very well will make that commitment. Because you see, Gutzon Borglum comes out that next summer and looks across the Black Hills with Don Robinson and some of the local guides and talks to them about potential carvings in the Black Hills. Now,
Pan across hills covered with trees.
Don Robinson's idea was not presidents. It was Western heroes, people like Calamity Jane, Wild Bill Hickok, and others. He thought would look really good amongst the Needles area, what is today Custer State Park along Highway 87.
Granite columns jut upward into the sky.
So Gutzon Borglum, as he arrives, he joins up with Don Robinson, and they head to the Needles. And there, Gutzon realizes that the Needles would not hold the sculpture. They are spires. Yeah, they're not that big, but they're granite spires that rise to the sky, and Gutzon Borglum didn't feel as if he could carve them, or if he could carve them, the carving wouldn't last very long because they're already heavily weathered. So he gets back on the train and goes back to Georgia at that time. Now, when he gets to Georgia, he finds out from the Daughters of the Confederacy there that he was going to be kicked off that sculpture. So what he did was he went to the top of the mountain where he found his scale model there and took an axe to it, crashing it into nothing. And the Daughters of the Confederacy at that time set out a warrant for Borglum's arrest. So Borglum literally fled on horseback, being chased by the local sheriff.
Early model of Stone Mountain with 3 men on horses.
But what turns out to be Georgia's loss is Mount Rushmore's gain. Borglum becomes committed to carving something here in the Black Hills, and he arrives that very next summer. So again, find that piece of rock and commit to the idea. So remember, in our story, so far we have an idea person, and now I think we have a commitment person. Guts and Borglum commits to carving something in the Black Hills because, you know, he just is coming off a failed process of carving Stone Mountain, so he needs to renew his good name in the sculpting community. So he decides to carve something in the Black Hills, but yet, at this point, we still haven't found a location for him
Photo
to
scouting
carve.
party, 1925
So
with men
they
and horses.
branch off into the Black Hills and look for various ridge lines, and he eventually
Present-day peak with
goes to
watchtower.
the top of Harney Peak, the tallest peak east of the Rockies until you get to Europe. On the top of Harney Peak, now named Black Elk Peak, he looks across the Black Hills and sees a ridgeline from the back that's broad-shouldered, made out of granite. So the next day they set out on horseback and look at Mount Rushmore, named for a Newark lawyer back in the day.
Photo Borglum, his son, and one other camped at the
He
base of Mount
realizes
Rushmore.
that once he sees Mount Rushmore, that this would be the spot. It's made out of Harney Peak granite, a very fine-grained granite worthy of sculpting.
Photo Rushmore before carving.
And it also faces the morning sun as it rises in the
Newspaper
southeast.
clipping text reads, Borglum
And
picks
it's
site
big
memorial.
enough for the idea, an ever-growing idea. And at this point, Guts and Borglum communicates to the group there assembled that he doesn't think that Western Heroes is something that he's going to buy into, or that other people will buy into. He wants to make something bigger and grander. So he decides at that moment, and has been thinking about it for a while, that presidents would be the perfect subject matter for a carving that he would create here. And I believe that from the idea person, Don Robinson, I believe now we have a firm commitment by Guts and Borglum to carve presidents
Photo early Borglum sketch of
instead
Washington
of
and
Western
Lincoln.
Heroes. And I believe now Gutson takes on the task of creation, or committing to the idea. The next step is, of course, the follow-through. Now, the follow-through of the carving begins really with this scale model. This is a 1/12 scale model made out of plaster of Paris and wood lumber up in the back of it to support the visage that you see. And it's this scale model, this being the original scale model, 1 of 9, that they start
Photo model.
creating to transfer those measurements to the top of the mountain. And the measuring device is the thing you see sitting on top of Lincoln's head right
Bar
there.
with string hanging
It's
down
called the
with weighted
pointing
bottom.
system, and here's another one just like
Close-up
it,
disc.
only of course a little bit smaller. The pointing system is an idea that began in Europe, over in Greece. And there, they believed that if they could take specific measurements, they could transfer those measurements to any form. Quite simply, there's a disc mounted on top of Lincoln's head right up there. Those of you sitting or standing over there towards the back,
Gesture head.
as you look up to the top, you can barely see the outline of that disc. And simply, the disc is a disc. It's a circle, 360 degrees in a circle. So the way you measure is you have the disc mounted firmly, you have the pivot point in the center point of the disc, or the center point of the head, and then the arm that you see there, the piece of angle iron, pivots on that center pivot point, just like this. So from the disc, you get the angle or the degree of that feature. Then as you, how about I just measure myself? How about that? Would that be all right?
Puts disc on head.
All right, here we go. So we'll call the nose, it doesn't make a difference where you start. We could call it 0, we could call it 90, we could call it 180. Doesn't make any difference, as long as you know where you're going. So let's measure I don't know, what do you think? What's gonna be the first thing to appear as you blast back away the slag or loose rock? That's right, the tip of the nose. That's exactly it. The tip of the nose is gonna be the first thing to appear. So let's measure the tip of my nose. First off, one measurement is 0 degrees, straightaway center. Then we raise the plumb bob,
This line to put weight on
that
nose.
tool that makes a line hang straight, right to the tip of my nose. And as long as the plumb line hangs straight, then we've got the tip of my nose measured in 3 dimensions. So the first measurement, we've got 0 degrees. That's the first measurement. The second measurement is the center pivot point of the arm or the disc out to where the plumb bob line begins. That is the horizontal distance from center. And finally, the vertical distance from center is from where the plumb bob line begins to the bottom of the plumb bob, and that is the measurements. The degrees, the distance from center to the horizontal feature, and then the distance to the vertical feature.
Photo pointing system on head.
So 3 measurements on every pointing system measurement. So once it would be the pointer standing in front of the scale model. There was scaffolding over the scale model at that time.
Photo man on top of scale model.
The pointer would take down those measurements and walk out that door.
Photo tram and memorial.
And get on the tram and take the tram to the top of the mountain.
Photo Borglum on tram.
They could also communicate by telephone back in the day. They had a telephone line that ran from the top to the bottom. So they could get up there, get in a bosun's chair, which is that thing hanging from the ceiling right there.
Chair with belt.
And the worker that took the measurements down would go over the mountain and literally paint on the sculpture. Now, if it was Gutzen Borglum, and often it was, Gutzen would
Photo Borglum and chair.
Get to the top of the mountain and go to the bosun's chair and the winch house where he had a little red paint can stashed up there. And he'd tuck the paint can on his belt and descend over the face of the rock in the bosun's chair. And he would get to that spot he just got done measuring on the scale model and literally take the red paintbrush and put X's on the sculpture, describing the distances or the depths that the worker would need to drill in that line of holes that he'd placed on the sculpture in the red paint. Literally write 1 foot 5 inches in red paint. There's still red paint on the sculpture in some places, by the way.
Photo winch house.
So you get there, then he'd be raised back to the top. Now, a winchman would be doing that operation, and of course the winch is sitting right over there. A winchman would lower Borglum over the face and then raise him back up. And there was a young man called the callboy that was sat right down on the edge of the granite, and he could look down or call to the person in the bosun's chair and communicate back and forth between them and the person operating the winch. So it was a solid communication line. So once Borglum got raised back to the top of the mountain, another person carrying the tools of the day
Photo workers.
would descend in that same bosun's chair.
Picks up jackhammer.
Often with this tool. This is, of course, an air-powered jackhammer. And he would get to that location, sitting in the bosun's chair, and recognize Borglum's paint marks on the sculpture and begin to drill on those marks. Literally X marks the spot. Drill to the depths that Borglum wanted.
Photo worker with jackhammer.
Drilling was a very physical activity, as you would expect. This jackhammer weighs in the ballpark of 35 pounds. And then when you have pneumatic air flowing through it, being expressed right there on the tip of the bit, it would take quite a while to drill all those holes. But eventually those holes would be drilled to the depths that Borglum wanted. So then the worker would be hoisted back to the top of the mountain, and another
Except fake dynamite.
person named a powderman, because he also knew how to handle charges of dynamite, and he would get back in that bosun's chair.
Photos people with
and
dynamite.
Place the charges in the holes. Now, depending on how much rock had to be removed, it would either be large or small charges of dynamite. You can cut dynamite if it's fresh, like you cut a carrot with a knife. So place those charges in those holes and unite the blasting line up to the top of the mountain, and at the top there was a T-handle blaster, like you've seen in old movies. And there, unite the negative, positive sides, going out to the blasting caps and the dynamite, and what happens next? When you depress the handle, boom, off comes the rock.
Photo rock blasting.
And that process of drilling and blasting occurred every day here at the memorial. Every day they were working anyway. Sometimes they didn't work in the wintertime. But eventually they could drill and blast to within 3 to 12 inches of the finished product. And at that point in time, another worker carrying, again, a jackhammer would get back in that bosun's chair, access that spot, and instead of boring
Photo worker.
vertical holes in the rock, they'd start to bore holes horizontally into the sculpture. Place those holes very, very close together. This is called honeycombing the granite. This is a piece of honeycomb granite right here.
Granite with line of holes.
So notice it's only like 3 inches thick. The workers could bore holes down to what would become the finished product. Notice this is nice and straight. Down to the finished edge, and this piece of granite would be then worked off.
Photo worker with hammer.
Sometimes you could just hit it hard with a hammer and it would shatter back to the depth of the holes. Other times you'd place a wedge bit into the jackhammer and you'd wedge between the holes.
Mimics wedging.
And this would allow the piece of honeycomb granite to come off. Finally, they're down to what would become the finished edge, but this finished edge, at the bottom of the holes where the bit made a circle, They're little pockmarks like dimples on a golf ball. What they had to work that off with then is it's a little bitty air-powered jackhammer with a little 4-pronged bit.
Close-up bit.
This is called a bumping tool, technically called a Dalit hand facer. And with a lot of care, a worker could massage the surface of the granite, making this sound all through the time they were working. And what this does was this actually pulverizes the surface of the granite. So a worker could smooth the surface out, but it also, in the process of this steel rattling against the granite, it would make it whiter. So that's why I use the word pulverization. So this is the last tool as we are in the follow-through process of the idea and the commitment. So after you finish creating the thing, what's next? Well, of course, it's the accomplishment. The accomplishment's next. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Remember that Don Robinson, what was his dream for the mountain? What was he believed Mount Rushmore or any sculpture in the Black Hills would do for the people here of South Dakota? That's right. He believed that it would draw people to the state. And just here at the memorial, 3 million people come here a year. So you might say that you all are part of the accomplishment of Mount Rushmore.
Memorial from above showing roads and parking.
But nothing ever occurs if you don't start out with the original idea. You commit to the idea. You work to make the idea occur. And finally, the accomplishment occurs. So you all here are part of the process of Mount Rushmore. That's why it's so important that you're here today. So thank you for coming to your memorial.
Time-lapse clouds and sunrise over Memorial. Text on black. Royalty-free music perspectives Kevin McLeod. INCOMPETECH.com. Licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license.